Let me introduce you to one of the proud supporters of From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Iowa floor covering down in Bondurant. Now, for the last year and a half, you've heard me talk about this great company in the heart of central Iowa. They've got their tough core, click together, 4.5 millimeter waterproof vinyl flooring, great for you DIYers out there. But even if you're just a contractor or you need a different type of flooring, they've got you covered, whether it be tile showers, carpet. Give Iowa Floor Covering a chance to serve you better and serve your flooring needs. Visit them online at iowafloorcovering.com. That's iowafloorcovering.com, or you can give them a call at 515-379-7000. That's 515-379-7000. Thank you to Iowa Floor Covering in Bondurant. As always, appreciate Iowa Floor Covering being with us here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. They've been a proud supporter of this show for quite some time, and we're thankful to IFC. And I want to extend my thanks to a good friend of mine, Sean Bock of 247 Sports, who's with us this evening. Sean, good to see you, sir. We're in the middle of another very busy August, so I appreciate you taking the time on a Wednesday.
Yeah, of course, Corey. I appreciate you having me, man. Yeah, it's like one of those times where, during the summer, you're kind of looking for stuff to do and, you got to be creative a little bit. But, the last couple of days I've been like, oh, shoot, like I gotta get stuff done. I can't just go out and golf, or I can't just, go out and do whatever at whatever time. Now it's kind of like, yeah, stuff's coming up, and, I gotta be productive. I gotta be an adult. So yeah, it's a good time. It's a good problem to have. We have interesting jobs. So now it actually feels like we're a little bit of a working adults here now.
Pickleball, right? That's the thing for Sean
That's
Bock.
a big one. That's a big one. Golf has been the big one this summer, but pickleball has been I'm an avid pickleballer. If you see me in at Iowa City High's courts, I'm usually there a couple of times, and there's a few other places out here. Nice spot in North Liberty too. So there's some good. I'm not one of the tryhards, or one of the. I'm a tryhard, but I'm not one of the people who live by it. But I play a decent amount, so it's all fun out here.
Do you frequent Finkbine?
No, I haven't. I actually haven't done Finkbine this year. I've done Saddleback. I've done Airport a few times. Obviously, that's because that's one of the cheaper ones out here. I live right by Quail Creek, so that one's kind of an older course, but it's pretty fun. I'm going out to Des Moines this weekend, so that'll be a good time. I played Riverside once, and I'm not good enough to play on Riverside yet. But yeah, no, it's amazing how nice the courses are out here. I was a little surprised, but they're really nice. Well, I wish it wasn't as expensive, but it is what it is.
Summer, this has been a great summer for the courses. Everything's lush and green, and I know we got some rain this week, which helped at least here in central Iowa. Where are you from originally, Sean?
Western Springs, Illinois. So it's about 25 minutes outside of Chicago, western suburbs. So Lyons Township is the public high school, and if Iowa fans remember Jack Beneventi, he went to Bennett Academy. That's the high school that I went to. So he's 2 years older than me. Obviously a former Iowa commit at one point. I remember Kirk Ferentz walking into to school a couple of times when he would go meet with the Bennett coaches and Jack. So I always thought that was kind of cool.
Very cool. So how far from home is Iowa City?
3 hours. So around 3 hours, 15 minutes, not bad at all. I've made that like it doesn't even feel like I'm driving on 80 anymore, because it's just like I've seen this so many times that it just like kind of goes like that. Or I mean, sometimes it gets even longer, but it's just so repetitive. But it's a quick, easy drive, and it's not too bad. I've gotten used to it, and you kind of use it as a time to collect your thoughts a little bit and just relax.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because you and I we chatted a little bit about making this happen over the weekend, media day, and then of course kids day the following morning. And you texted me this afternoon and said, "Hey, what are we talking about? What's the outline?" So I'm going to ask you a question that not many people. I don't normally lead with this. What do you think is on the minds of Hawkeye fans right now?
What do I think is on the mind of Hawkeye fans? I've done I went 2 weeks without doing a podcast besides like the one that we do, the Swarmcast. I think I've done like 3 or 4 or 5 in the last like 2 days. And it's like, what if I've like thought of myself, I'm like, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a fan, what am I thinking about? Because we have different, we're different from fans. Like obviously, you want Iowa to win because like it's good for business and like it does, that kind of helps, us and just makes everything better. And from that perspective. But when you put yourself in the shoes of a fan, it's kind of like what, you know, what don't you hear that we hear? And like if you didn't hear rumblings behind the scenes, if you weren't subscribed to any of the message boards, you weren't subscribed to, Hawk Central or Scott Document over there at the Athletic, what would you hear? What would your initial reaction be when you saw the Kids Day stuff? And I mean, it wouldn't be reassuring right off the bat, especially based on what happened last year with this offense and how this offense has struggled over the last couple of years, and all the chatter of Tim Lester kind of being not necessarily the prodigal son, but he's going to refresh things. And obviously last year with Cade McNamara too, he kind of was the prodigal son for most people because coming over and Iowa didn't have a quarterback of that pedigree in quite some time, and he didn't. He was coming off that season-ending surgery at Michigan, but people were kind of like not really thinking about that much. They were all just thinking about that 2021 season that he had at Michigan. And, Kirk Ferentz mentioned that a couple of times too during the press conference that, we saw what he did against us in the Big Ten championship game. And we thought he would be a perfect fit. And, I think everyone thought about the Big Ten championship, leading Michigan to a college football playoff. And, that's perfect for us. Like that's all we need. But now it's like you fast forward a year and a half later, Cade really hasn't done much of, if anything, for Iowa to this point. And to see, him coming off another season ending injury, to have him, kind of struggle the way that he did and kind of the offense, at first glance struggle the way that they did, it's a little bit discouraging. But I think when you go inside of it and you look at, what we saw from a offensive line perspective, from a running game perspective, it was encouraging in, certain aspects. But, not to ramble on too much, but I think, it's definitely quarterback play and, how people kind of perceive that. And we're kind of, a little rattled about that.
I agree. And I think having the youngest of the EPENESAs, how do you actually pronounce the young man's first name?
IOSE.
IOSE. Okay. I think I said
Yeah.
IOSE at one point and somebody corrected me. To have IOSE there, I think helped, right? Just to have a 5-star kid,
Yeah.
4 or 5-star kid in the building helped. And there has been chatter, and I want to talk, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, been talk about him and is he close to committing? But, Saturday we watched the same series of plays for Cade and for Brendan Sullivan and frankly for the other 3 quarterbacks. And I keep going back to the same thing. Like, I listened to Tim Lester talk for 10 minutes on Friday. I don't know how much time you spent with Coach Lester. And, not to compare, obviously it's natural to compare back, think back to conversations or statements you heard Brian Ferentz make over the last 6 to 7 years. But there's something about Tim's way he goes about everything from a communication standpoint. Obviously, we're not there on the field during practice each and every day, but something that inspires confidence in me. And maybe I'm being fed a load of fool's gold, and I'll find that out I'm given this. First of all, I made the statement last night that I'm not going to be judging anything with the offense until at least Big Ten play comes. Because I think it's going to take time, right? I mean, I think this is not going to be a finished product by August 31st. Frankly, it's probably not going to be a finished product in late November. But can they get to a point where you're, okay, are we out of the cellar? Are we top 90, top 80 in the country in total offense? I think those sounds like, and I wasn't there for the quote, but I heard somebody said that Tim said something about being 65th, like cutting that 130 number in half. I wasn't there for that quote, but if that's the case, that's not coming in September. I mean, I'll go on a limb and say that. But there's something about how he carries himself that does inspire confidence with me. And then you look at his track record with receivers, and if anybody missed the little bit of back and forth I was able to have with Tim on Friday, I asked him specifically about what he did at Western Michigan with the receivers, how involved he was with the wideouts, because he had a number of different wide receiver coaches during that time period. and he was at Western Michigan, like 6 years? And you have Sky Moore, you have Dwayne Eskridge, you have Jaden Reed. It's pretty high volume for a short period of time and a window where you have a number of different position coaches involved. So all of that, I've explained that to people, and I kind of had to rehash that because I do sense a strong aura of negativity since Saturday, and I get it. And I don't normally do this, but for people to kind of understand where I'm coming from, Johnny Unitas Award, right? The watch list today, Cade McNamara was named on the watch list. And just if you scroll through Hawkeye Football's Twitter account and look at some of the comments in response to that, I'll just give you a few so people can kind of understand. And what you said at the beginning, Sean, is perfect because a year ago at this time, he was the promised son, right?
Yeah.
He was like the savior of Iowa football. He was going to save Brian Ferentz's career.
Well, remember looking back at that wrestling meet too, where him, Eric Hall, and I think was Ernest Hausman on his visit that day?
Yes.
Was that because I remember them walking in, and they were clapping like crazy. And I get it, like, it's you haven't had like that. I mean, I said I'm not to get too far back into it, but I always said that Nate Stanley, Iowa fans were going to miss the heck out of him, and the last couple of years have kind of shown that, and it's kind of like they haven't like you said, they just haven't had a high profile quarterback in that time from at that point. But yeah, keep going.
So again, think about where fans were a year ago and listen to some of these responses. And we know that some of the dumbest people are the loudest on Twitter. I get that. But listen to some of these responses to the announcement that Cade McNamara has been named to the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award. Mike says, we just hand this out to anyone nowadays. Mo says, I mean, what are we doing here? Mitchell says, according to who? I don't even know who this is. Some Nebraska fan says this guy is at the same QB level as Casey Samuelson. Chris comments a laughing emoji from That 70s Show. You have Cyclone. Well, some of these are outside the fan base, right? But I do think there's somebody posted this as a picture of Cade lying on his face from last year.
Oh, jeez.
The point is, I'm not laughing at that, but the point is, there is an aura of negativity. How far do you, I mean, I know you kind of alluded to that earlier, but how far do you read into the numbers from Saturday? Because I think they have to be taken with a very large grain of salt.
Yeah. I mean, I said this on the other shows that I've been on. It's like, how much are they really going to show us too? Because, there are other teams, other coaches, everything like that, they are trying to get every ounce of, any sort of scouting report from, these types of team practice or these types of fall practices from other teams. And, Iowa, this is the one where, probably there's the most intrigue because, yes, we've seen what this has been like the last couple of years. And, there's different changes and everything. And, they kind of been saying that Tim Lester is, taking total control of the offense. And, honestly, like, I get it. Like, I get, like, they're just not going to show us much. But, from a stats perspective, like Brendan Sullivan, that was encouraging. I think like his numbers were okay. Like his play wasn't great, but there were some plays that you're kind of like, okay, like I can see why, Iowa made it a point to get after this guy or go after this guy. And, that made a lot of sense. But I look more like I said before, like I look at the running game. Like if I were to track those numbers, I think people would have been a lot more reassured of what the offense looked like because, at the start, as soon as Tim Lester took this job, what was the first thing he said? Like he's like, we got to be able to run the football. And that's something that, Iowa has not had in the last couple of years consistently. They've had guys like LaShawn Williams be able to break off big runs. They've had guys like Tyler Goodson do that. Mekhi Sargent was a really good back too. But, I think like just being able to run the football on Saturday, I thought that was really, really impressive for me. At least something that I looked at and was like, okay, like, I can work with this or I can, take something good away from this. And I thought that was pretty refreshing because, it's not going to be there right off the bat with the passing game. And it's taking time. Like I know, we've heard it in the past. People have heard it in the past that the offense is, potentially moving that ball or, potentially, looking different than it has in years past, but it just wasn't. And, this year it's like, yes, you've seen the run game, in those certain kids camps, but you know, this time too, it's like you saw the offensive line actually kind of move guys consistently and actually get that push. And I thought that was really, really intriguing for me. And dude, I'm not used to like these like comments popping up in the bottom. So I'm like reading them and I'm like
You're
looking at
good.
it, reading
Well,
them, and I just totally
this
lose my thought.
no, you're good. This one by from Tekun is absolutely on line with what you're saying. Run first offense. This offense is still going to have to establish it on the ground. And what you just said is exactly what I've been saying all week since Saturday. Is they're going to have to win games early on defense with solid
Mhm.
special teams as always. And then if they can run the ball, people forget like the pass offense needs to be better. Yes, no one's
Yeah,
debating that. But did people forget 2020? I mean, that was Spencer
yeah,
Petras' first year at the helm. He was not any good in 2020. Go back and watch those games. He was in, you could argue he was as bad in 2020 as he was in 21 and 22. The difference was they had what you said, Mekhi Sargent, Tyler Goodson. They had an adequate run game. And yes, a lot of the Big Ten was down that year. Penn State was down, Minnesota
mhm,
was down, Michigan State was down. But we all know this isn't Murderers Row this year. So to me, you get past September, can you go 4-0? Okay. They should go at least 3-1, at least, right? You should beat
yeah,
Minnesota on the road. You should take care of business against Illinois State and Troy. Can you run your way to a victory against Iowa State? I think that's the key. That's game 2 is going to be so big. And I've talked with the guys over at SB Nation discussing this game. We do a yearly series with one of their guys, and I mean, Iowa State's in the playoff conversation, preseason trendy conversation as well. So, like preseason, that game is huge. And I think with Iowa's
yeah,
developmental phase in which it's in right now on offense, that is just going to be an intriguing matchup. And you could argue the biggest game of the season because the emphasis on Big Ten games, I mean, it's taken a back seat to everything else
right.
because of the playoff conversation. Really, what matters is your total record and strength of record. So I am in agreement with you. I think if they can run the ball, and I saw an encouraging push. Now I don't go back and track stats. I'm not curious enough to go track stats from a kids' day open practice, but I am curious to know what their averages were. It
Mhm.
felt like they were getting a consistent push up front, and there were less negative yardage plays than we've seen in the past. And obviously, Iowa's had a big issue with -3, -4, even -5 at times.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said this too, like, and it's obvious when you watch it. You can get 6 or 7 yards in a carry, but if you get -3, -2 in your next 2 carries, you're not getting a first down, you're punting the ball away. And there were just so many times in the last couple of years where, a guy would get 7 or 8 yards, but then, you know, what about the other plays? And Tim Lester brought up a good point too. It's like, yes, this sounds kind of dumb and cliche, but first down is so important. First and second down are so important. Like you got to be able to have plays that can set you up for success. And if you can run the ball on first down and get 5 or 6 yards, you're in a much better position at 2nd and 5 than you are in 2nd and 10 or 2nd and long. That makes a heck of a difference. And like I said, it just sounds so dumb and so obvious, but like it's so true. Like how many times in the last couple of years was there 2nd and long, 3rd and long, after kind of an incompletion on a first down or a run that maybe gets you like 1 or 2 yards. Like if you can just make that difference going from, 1 to 2 to 4 to 5 or 5 to 6, like that changes everything. That makes everything so much easier on the next couple of downs and puts less pressure on you to have to draw up something, a little more creative to get that first down. And yeah, man, it's just like running the football. Like it can't be understated just how important that is because it is so crucial. And especially with this offense too, like it's the stats the last couple of years have just been not encouraging. And that's been a little frustrating from an offensive perspective because you've been watching Iowa longer than I have, but it's like every time like Iowa's most successful teams, like they've been able to run the football very effectively. And on Saturday, I would say the averages were a lot more encouraging. Yes, there were some plays that went for -1 or 2 yards or even -3 yards, but there were more plays that went for 4 or 5 yards than they did the negative plays. And there were a couple plays that went for, 8, 9, 10 or beyond yards, like than there were that negative yards. And I thought that was a really bright spot for me. And and they didn't even have Sean Williams. And I would venture to say that he's their number one back right now, based on when I was talking to Liddell Betts on Friday. I kind of asked him, I was like, where do you see things at right now? Like, what's kind of the pecking order? Like, I know it's gonna be running back by committee, but are you gonna use, like, is there a guy that's kind of standing out or a guy that's encouraging you the most? And he didn't say it. He said he has something in his mind, but he's not gonna say it. But in talking about him, he's saying that Kamari's been great, Kamari Moulton's been great, Caleb Johnson's been great, Jazz has been good too. LaShawn Williams is just like he's the one that's most consistent. And, that's obviously him being, not injured last year while Caleb Johnson and Jazzy Patterson battled those injuries last year. So I think that has something to do with it. But I also think, like, maybe it's just me, but I feel like he's so underappreciated. I mean, he won Iowa games last year. Like, he didn't win that Nebraska game, but without him, they're not winning that game. Wisconsin, if he doesn't have that long run, they're probably not going to win that game. I'm kind of blanking. Wasn't there another one too?
But he's their most complete back. I mean, he's just their most complete back. I think everybody wants to talk about somebody, and I don't even know who it was. Somebody that was at media day made the comment to Liddell, and I'm not ripping whoever this media person was, but somebody made the comment to Liddell. Hey, I want to ask you a question about Caleb Johnson, because obviously you look at him and he's just a physical specimen. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. A physical specimen. Like, that's great that you feel that. And he is big. I know he's cut. He likes to post pictures of his body on Instagram and whatnot. That's great. I know he really views himself that way too. But he's not their most complete back. The guy who's shown the ability to break free, to put his foot in the ground, to change direction, who's I think most patient, is LaShawn Williams. And so he was out on Saturday and they still ran the ball effectively. And hey, Luke Lachey was out Saturday. I think that's noteworthy. Your top tight end, we know how important Iowa's tight ends are, not only in the passing game, but also in the run game. So I think both those things are noteworthy. I thought Jazz Patterson ran with authority. And when I saw preseason, him having fallen off the depth chart, I thought, that was a little concerning to me, given the fact that, hey, here's a kid who I thought might enter the portal during the offseason. He comes back, and you have a second-year guy in Kamari Moulton jump you, and you're not even listed on the 2 deeps, or in that case, the 3 deeps. I was surprised, but it looked like he was engaged. I think they've got 4 guys there, assuming they all stay healthy. And here's my bold take, and maybe this isn't as bold as I'm making it out to be, Sean, but here's my bold take, and I first said it yesterday. Iowa is going to play 2 quarterbacks week 1. I don't think there's any way.
2 quarterbacks week 1.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And I would be willing to say I guarantee that.
By choice?
By choice. Assuming they're both healthy, Cade McNamara and Brendan Sullivan will both play week 1. We could see some separation here in the last couple of weeks of camp, and I'm reading somewhat into lingo, and then obviously what we saw, kind of the buzz that I heard pre-Kids Day, I just think it's a lot closer than maybe people think. I think a lot of people just assume because Cade is the incumbent, and he's been getting most of the work with the ones up until at least Saturday. He's got most of the work with the ones on Saturday. I think some people just assume that's Kirk's guy. But Kirk even made the comment at Big Ten Media Days that he thinks that they have an opportunity to have a package in for Brendan Sullivan. He was the one who brought that up. That was not asked of him. The fact that Kirk volunteered that, I think Kirk's already thinking, even if Cade is our number 1 guy, we'll have an opportunity to get Brendan Sullivan on the field. I don't think he volunteers that unless he's being serious. And I think with Tim Lester's, I think with his influence and Jacob Gill, from everything I've heard, and John, you may tell me I'm dead wrong, everything I've heard, he's probably their top receiver right now, at least week 1 with Caleb Brown out. I think Jacob Gill's their top receiver. Obviously, Brendan and Jacob are very close, and they have chemistry. I just think all in all, they both play, and I think you're going to see something similar to what Michigan did with JJ and Cade a couple of years back.
Yeah. I was thinking that too. I was kind of like, didn't Cade have this sort of situation at Michigan where they were like, Was it one played the first half? It was so the season opener, one of them started, and then the other played the second half, and then the next game, the other one started and played the second
Yeah,
half. Is that how that went?
you could be right. I was thinking that they just one played one game and then the other played the next game, but
That's okay.
you could be right. You could be right. It might have been halves.
Yeah, I can't remember. I thought yesterday it was games, but then like part of me thinks halves. I mean, not important, but like that's a really good point because a lot of the talk you said it like preseason was like this is Cade's job to lose. Like there's no way he's losing this. And then there's stuff behind the scenes where there's like, yeah, Cade's saying he's 100% healthy and he is 100% healthy, but I don't think he's as 100% as people are making it out to be. And there's kind of a little bit of a there's obviously a mental block that you have to get over when you have, you know, not one, but two season ending injuries. And Tim Lester mentioned that too at Media Day. I was listening back to the audio before the show, and he was saying it takes like 1 to 2 months to really overcome that mental block. And I think he was full go and like Cade was full go end of June, early July. So he's kind of still in that mental, space a little bit where he's kind of still has to figure that out because, if you like it's I mean, I never played quarterback. I only played 2 years of football, so I don't get like, the whole but I can kind of tell it's like and Lester mentioned it really well. You get hit in the pocket you're kind of like, oh shoot, like something's gonna happen. Like, what was the last time you were hit in the pocket?
Yeah.
When I mean, he didn't go down. He didn't get hit, but like all of last year, he was kind of playing like, I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hit, and was like really uneasy. And it's like now, like you don't get hit that much when you're coming back from injury. You don't get touched, but now it's like, okay, you're starting to get healthy. You gotta get some pressure on you. You got to know what it's like to, have the pocket collapse on you. And, if you get hit or you get pushed, like your initial reaction is going to be like, oh my gosh, my knee, instead of like finishing the play or, kind of, you know, just observing it, I guess, or seeing what, how the play develops and whatnot. Or, even like if you don't get rid of the ball, like if you can be able to take a hit and, escape the pocket or get out of the pocket, that's something that you have to overcome because if you get hit and you're like, oh my gosh, my knee, that's a split second. That's a couple like split seconds that are taken away from you seeing what happens in the play. And that could be the difference between a sack, from a second defender and then, a guy finding a receiver downfield for a touchdown or a big game. Like it's that quick of a nanosecond or like whatever it is, like that quick of a nanosecond where, you have to be able to take those hits and you got to be able to, you know, fight through that. And that's a tough hill to overcome, like especially when you have had the injury history that McNamara has. And, I think he's really dealing with that. While Brendan Sullivan's more of that kind of, I don't want to say like free spirit type quarterback, but he's more of that guy that's like, I really don't have like too much of an injury history. Or like I think he got hurt like maybe once a couple years ago, but it's like he doesn't have the extent of what Cade is. And Cade I thought showed some pretty good movement on Saturday for what he's kind of been dealing with. But I think Sullivan still has that better sideline lateral ability and ability to move in and out of the pocket. And, I think that's something that, he's really taken to his advantage and something that he has over Caden. We talk all the time. I know people's obsession lately has been mobile quarterbacks, and I totally understand that because, they've kind of had statues the last couple of years at quarterback for Iowa. And, it's the guys they recruited and the guys they wanted. And, you can't knock on them for that. But, in this day and age, like you got to get guys that can move a little bit in the pocket to extend plays and, keep the defenses honest with RPOs. And, Sullivan brings that. And I think, having that guy that can move around a little bit more makes so much of a difference because it just makes, you can extend plays, you can guys getting secondary routes and whatnot. And, just kind of just opens things up a lot more instead of a guy where I'm not saying, this is the case for Cade, but, based on what Lester was saying, you get hit or, you are about to take a hit, where does your head go? Do you go to finishing the play or do you go to, kind of bracing yourself from the hit? And obviously it's tough to do both, but, you're kind of taught in football, you got to absorb it, you got to take it. And, just how much of that, has Cade been able to overcome? Because Lester was saying last week that, he's had a couple moments where, he's got it, but then there's a couple moments where he doesn't. And I think that's, something that he's still kind of trying to figure out and, something that maybe Brendan Sullivan doesn't have that, mindset about.
Sullivan, the other thing about Sullivan, he's a better athlete. I mean, he's just a better
Yeah.
athlete. He's quicker. Yeah, I think even with the injury, I thought Cade moved pretty well Saturday.
Mhm.
But maybe the part of that is still the knee. I think Brendan is just a quicker decision maker with his feet. And obviously, we know Marco is really exceptional with his feet. I saw somebody earlier said that Marco should be starting. I would like to see Marco get some plays here or there, given his skill set, but he's not going to start. And I would be surprised if Tim Lester, I even said this when they hired him, I'd be surprised if Tim doesn't utilize Marco's skill set. And quite frankly, Sean, I've made this comment to Coach Patterson. When you have a guy, and we see this across the country, guys hopping in and out of the portal left and right, but especially at quarterback where only one guy theoretically plays, I think there's almost something to be said for playing a guy just to keep him happy. And if you have confidence in a guy's future, that doesn't mean you start him, right? Doesn't mean that you sacrifice wins and losses. But I'll give you a perfect illustration where I think Iowa has been in a very opportunistic situation and where they've missed the call. One being a couple of years ago was at the Music City Bowl, where they had an opportunity to play Carson May, and instead they chose to stick it out with Petrus. And was it Petrus or Padilla? No, it was Hogan.
Wasn't
My
that
bad.
Labus?
No,
Oh,
you're Labus, man. All these guys that
yeah.
end up at D2 schools. It was Labus. And what happened? They end up bringing in Sam Laporta as a Wildcat quarterback. And I know that you're
Yeah.
trying to be cute and you're trying to give. I don't need to totally rehash old news, but that was stupid, first of all. Stupid on a number of fronts. One, because here's Sam Laporta coming off a knee injury himself. And here's a guy who's about to be drafted a few months later. Why would you run him as a Wildcat quarterback, even if you're trying to be cute? And what happened after that, shortly after, and it sounds like maybe this was already in the works, but shortly after Carson May enters the portal. Now, not implying that Carson May was the answer to Iowa's quarterback situation, but why wouldn't you use that opportunity to play, at least for a few snaps, a guy who you recruited because you liked the guy's upside? And I think that's the case with Marco. Figure out a way to get him on the field this year. He's still got 3 years? No, 4 years. He's still got 4 years of football ahead of him if he wants them. So you know what he's got on the ground. You know with his athleticism and his speed that he's got something there. Can you develop his ability to throw the football? I would hope so. That's the hope with Tim Lester. So keep him happy, and maybe you see 3 quarterbacks at one point. But I stand by my statement. I think we'll see 2, and I don't know exactly what it'll look like. If it's 75% Cade, 25% Sullivan, I'm not totally confident that Cade's going to stay healthy through the rest of fall camp. I mean, he may not. And last year, I know Don Patterson had made the comment on this very show that when you're not playing 100%, you're more susceptible to further injury. So, I mean, who knows whether he would have been out for the season had he not been playing hurt, but he was playing hurt through that first month. And I just, the more and more I see, we saw Kids Day and we saw the performances, the more and more I think about it, I think we're going to see a lot more Brendan Sullivan than maybe some people think.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think, Kirk is going to absolutely, I don't want to say dread playing 2 quarterbacks, but I don't think it's the preferred route that he wants to go. And, they brought Brendan Sullivan in for a reason. It's like, you can't have what happened last year happen again. Because, if you don't have that defense, you're winning probably 7 games. Like, maybe, I mean, you're probably winning 6 games. Like, I mean, honestly, you probably win less than that. Like, that defense and that special teams unit was special. Like, no pun intended there, but like that was a very good group. And, with Marco too, I think it's really fascinating because you bring in Brendan Sullivan. Marco wasn't going to be the starter next year. I don't think he's ready for that. I think it's going to take him, I think he's a year away from being, a year away. So I think like maybe by the time his 4th year on campus, he could legitimately, maybe not. I mean, next year he'll definitely be in the conversation, but Brendan Sullivan's going to be your starter unless he has, an injury this season, knock on wood, that he doesn't. But, you bring in a guy like Jackson Stratton too, who, I've heard some positive things about throughout fall camp that he's, kind of pushing Marco for that 3rd spot. I mean, I've only heard that from like one person that's kind of secondhand, so it's not, totally, something I totally put a lot of stock into, but this, Corey. Once you kind of hear something that from people you trust a little bit, like there's a little bit of legs to it. There might be a little bit of legs to it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point though. It's like at what point, especially in this day and age of college football, you know, w- it's like, are you think obviously you got to think now to win these games, but you know, what does that do with like how do you keep a guy like Marco Linus happy? That's a good point that you bring up because it's like you got to be if you like him enough, like to keep him around, like you find a way to maybe get him on the field this year. But I think Iowa, it's like they're gonna stick with two guys. If they stick with two guys, I think the preference will be just sticking with one. And I think Sullivan's gonna find his way on the field eventually too. I mean, I don't think Cade, like you said before, I don't think Cade like is just all there, like in terms of physical and he's still overcoming that mental block, but it's like, what's it going to take for Kirk to do that? Do you think it's like, I mean, if you're right though, if like Lester has complete control of the offense, like, is he going to have a bigger say in what Iowa wants to do? Because I mean, you can put different packages in with Sullivan to, maybe run RPOs and, different design quarterback runs and whatnot, and, different types of schemes and, stuff that's more creative because you're right. I think Brendan Sullivan is a better fit for Iowa's offense with Tim Lester than Cade McNamara is. But it's like Cade's got 21 games, Sullivan's got 8 games, but Cade has the injury. Sullivan doesn't have the injury. Sullivan
Let,
has the skill that fits better.
let's be honest. If Marco develops a consistent arm, he's the best of the three as it relates to fit. Like to have
Mhm.
an RPO guy who can run like he can run. And I mean, dude's built. I mean, he's built like a back, like a running back. Um, and I talked to him briefly. I'll have to post that footage here at some point in the next few days, but talked to him Friday. He looked different to me. I think he slimmed down a little bit. And I even asked him that, and I think he said, "Yeah, I've lost a few pounds." By the way, appreciate this comment, the super chat from D. Rollifson. Guaranteed, Iowa plays in the Rose Bowl this year. Funny joke, D. Rollifson. Yes, I would agree with that. So appreciate the super chat there. And CDDD says, "Stop it, Corey. You're scaring me." Okay, so a couple things here. We got a couple people waiting to talk on the phone line. Before we get to Doug, who's been waiting on hold since the beginning, Casey, yes. Thank you, Casey, for reminding everybody. If you're online, we got about 211 people watching right now. Please hit that like button. It does help. And before we get into this further, Sean, we're 40 minutes in. This is flown by. I want to take a moment to plug your stuff. You're doing a great job over at 247. What kind of access do you give the Hawkeye fans that are subscribed? And what are you up to right now besides fall camp and the hype surrounding the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously recruiting is a little bit slower right now, but it's starting to pick up just a little bit with IOSE EPENESA being on campus this past weekend and potentially making a decision here soon. It's definitely going to be a smaller 2025 class. So, there's a little bit of encouragement with what this class can be. I mean, there's a lot of excitement over there. And, I'm excited to see what happens this fall with those senior seasons and, some of the late flyers that we see in this class. But, I think the big thing that obviously football is going to be king this fall, and obviously we have a lot of fall camp buzz on our site, and a lot of recruiting stuff when we get on there and different analysis type stuff. Podcasts really, coming along well, and we got a bunch of stuff from media day in the next week or two leading up to the season and previews and whatnot. But man, keep an eye on Iowa basketball recruiting this fall. I think that's going to be really exciting. I did a piece the other day that Iowa has 10 top 170 prospects in the 2025 class visiting campus this fall for official visits. That's probably the most that they've had ever. I know it's the most. I've been covering them since like 2018, I think it was 2019. So that was my sophomore year of college. Um, so that's been the most hype I think around the basketball program in terms of recruiting stuff. I know, Corey, like I get, some of the frustration around the basketball program and not being consistent. And, with the transfer portal, there's not as much interest with certain stuff. But, I was really taking it to heart to, kind of get some of these guys that, could be potential 3 or 4 year guys that are really good that maybe they don't have a chance with in previous years. While other programs that might have been going after them are so focused on the portal, Iowa's going after these guys and, potentially landing them. I mean, it's going to be tough for a number of them to, get them in the fold, but, they're encouraged about what they have coming on campus. And, it should be a pretty exciting fall in that respective. So that's one of the big things I'm tracking this fall outside of football. And I think that, we do a pretty good job of, kind of giving everyone the in-depth stuff on that. But, definitely the next couple of weeks, fall camp buzz, recruiting updates and, a number of other things that, make us a pretty good, outlet for your Iowa sports and your Iowa recruiting stuff. And, I think Iowa fans are spoiled with the amount of coverage that they have too on their Hawkeyes.
Absolutely. And it leads perfectly into this next call because I know our friend Doug, who's calling in, is a big basketball guy, and he comment here at the very beginning of the show, can he talk about basketball? Yes, Doug, you are here, and you are here to talk about basketball. Doug, welcome as always. Good to see your face.
Yeah, I actually had some football stuff, but because you guys, the internet's kind of going in and out here. So, yeah. Well, you kind of answered a little bit. I see they offer a lot of people. I'm going to first go on my football stuff. You're saying how we need a running game. You both are really young, probably don't remember the 04 season, might not have been very old during that time. But they won the Big Ten with only averaging about 100 yards rushing, went down to their fourth-string running back. I don't have anyone now. Hello?
Yeah, we got you, Doug.
Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Who is most likely – this is a football question. I'm going to do 2 football questions, a basketball question, then one's kind of a both question. Okay. Football question, who's most likely to be here next year to be the starting quarterback, Sullivan or Linez? Or either of them on a transfer? You see them both staying through the year? What's the future after this year look like? And if meaning without knowing what playing time either of them are going to get?
It's a great question. I guess I can take a stab at that. I would just be guessing, Doug. I think chances are they're both here, but man, that's hard to predict just because. Are you asking who do I think will start in 2025?
Yes.
Oh, well, if I had to guess that, I think the safer choice is Brendan Sullivan, just because he's done it. And with Cade being gone, and Sullivan has 1 year left. So I'd probably say Brendan, but I really do think that maybe we've seen the tide turn as it relates to Kirk's view on 2 quarterbacks. So I bring that up because, hey, if it works this year with Cade and Brendan both playing at times, then maybe they can that will assist their call to keep Marco and Brendan here that, hey, you're both going to play. And then if you're Marco, not only are you going to play, but then when Sullivan moves on, we're handing the keys to the kingdom to you. I think that's maybe a way you can play this.
Yeah. My next question kind of is a comment question. So you, after the Minnesota game, don't think they'll be in the top 100 or top 50? I think they have to get 400 yards against Illinois State and Troy. I mean, if they don't do that against those type of teams, how are they don't do it against Big Ten competition?
400 yards is a lot of yards.
350. Well, for Iowa, I don't know. It's an FCS team. Shouldn't they get 400 yards against FCS?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of people pooping their pants during the month of September because here's what's going to happen.
Okay.
You're going to have people, Doug, and I'm not saying you're going to soil yourself, but there will be people that do, because there's going to be games in September where there are low offensive outputs and people are going to be panicking and saying exactly what you just said. Oh, why aren't we scoring more against Illinois State? I'm telling you, once it clicks, I think for some of these guys, I'm not saying across the board, I do think you're going to see exponential growth because they're so far in the gutter. They have been. And a lot of these players are the same guys, but they've added some people like Jacob Gill, like Brendan Sullivan. Illinois State is not roadkill, Doug. They lost 4 of their 5 games last year. They lost by like 4 points or less. And their only loss where they lost by at least 2 scores was against South Dakota State, who was a national champion. So I think let's not discredit Illinois State and what they can do. And then you look at Troy, they've been one of the more consistent FBS programs of the last 5 years, G5 programs. I think the schedule is very workable. They should be 4-0, but let's pump the brakes on Iowa's offense going nuts during the first month, not only because of it being a developmental season, but also because of the strength of the FCS and FBS teams on the schedule.
Well, I just, back in Hayden Fry's days, 49-7 against those teams, and we might only score 14 points. I went to that South Dakota State game a few years ago, or maybe it was just 2 years ago. That was scary.
You were at that game, Doug?
Yeah, we went to that game.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I am too. I'm like, when the punter is MVP, and it was, like I said, to only get 7 points, and they didn't score a touchdown to get 7 points, right?
Two safety.
Yeah.
Two safeties and a field goal.
I mean, it's just like they did get in the red zone, didn't they? Maybe not.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
They may not have, unless they may have turned the ball over once down there. That may have happened, but they missed a field goal early. Then they had the two safeties and the field goal was all they had. It was set 7-3.
Yeah, and then these questions about recruiting for Sean here. I kind of looked at your guys as Warm, who's is that. Can you talk a little bit about how close maybe Chase Thompson and the kid from Alabama are, and what is it? Should I be concerned they haven't signed somebody by now? I mean, it just seems like this is August and we haven't had anyone in the 25 class yet. Is that at all concerning? And how close are those two of signing? Because I've heard those two are maybe closest to. I don't know.
Yeah, Chase Thompson, I would say, is probably the one that's a little closer than Simon Walker right now, the guard from Huntsville, Alabama. Thompson, I mean, you look at him and you're kind of like, people are kind of like, oh, like this again, like another 6'8", like white, guy who's versatile, plays a 3 or 4. It's like, oh, this again. But I mean, some of those guys have been really good for Iowa, and I get it, like, what's, limiting them from taking the next step. But, this is one of those guys that I think comes into the program eventually, and, Fran really, wraps his arm around him and, makes him into a really productive 3 to 4 year player and potentially a 2-year starter. He's more athletic than I think people give him credit for. I don't want to use the term sneaky athletic, but he is sneaky athletic, shoots the ball really well. That was kind of his forte. And it's like, you need more shooters on this team. I mean, after Peyton Sanford leaves, Coker Koch is going to be your best, probably your most prolific shooter, along with Price, if Price can get to that point. I'm not saying Chase is going to be, a knockdown 63 pointers in his first season, but he's going to be able to come off the bench, hit shots and, rebound the ball effectively. He's a better defender than I think people give him credit for. I think the one thing that's a little concerning right now is like –
No, I'm joking. I said we just went over a recruit for about a minute on a football show now. But my last question is, who has more pressure this year, Kirk or Fran? Do either of them have any pressure this year for their legacy, maybe even retirement? I mean, I don't think
100%. It's Kirk doesn't have any pressure. What pressure does Kirk have?
But I mean, hey, look at this. Think about it this way, though. It's like, this roster. With how many like 5th and 6th year guys that they have, the schedule that they have in the 12-team college football playoff, it's like this is kind of a year where you think to yourself, okay, like obviously, things can, with the transfer portal next year, like they can hit a ton of guys and the expectations can be high again. But think about all the guys that you're potentially losing after this year and the schedule that you have this year. Like there's a lot of pressure.
So I guess
I would say. No, keep going.
I guess I take the question about pressure more to mean like whose job is in jeopardy if they don't perform this year.
Well, neither on the hot seat.
Well, hey, Doug, you don't think Fran should be on the hot seat if they go out there and not to bring up more soil, but take a dump this year after missing out on the NCAA's last year? If they don't go to the NCAA tournament this year, he should be on the hot seat.
I guess I didn't even really I'm such an optimistic basketball fan. I think they're an NCAA team, so like that's one of the reasons why I guess Fran. I always said 2 losing seasons in the where you're not in the NCAA tournament, they got to start asking some questions, Beth and the people. But I'm pretty optimistic about basketball this year. I like the way their non-conference has shown up. I like the teams that they do play twice in the Big Ten. I think that I would be very, very disappointed, and probably with some of these other people like Ari Gold always tells me that I'm too much of a homer and friend. But I'd be very disappointed if they didn't make the NCAA. But,
yeah, exactly. And if Kirk doesn't make the 12-team playoff, he's gonna take a trip to Wisconsin Dells, and it's all gonna be fine.
I guess pressure wise, is there? No, I wouldn't say that. But you do think? I guess I was going to say how much pressure is on Cade, but do you? And I know you've already kind of went over this. Think Cade will be? Will Cade? How many games will Cade start this year? He's going to start the first game. How many games will Cade start in all? Because you're also putting injuries and other things. I'm going to put over under 7.5. Does he start more than that? Start all the games?
You know what? Can I give you another illustration, Doug?
Sure.
That's like asking me, all right, you normally wake up around 8 o'clock. Are you going to wake up at 7:58, 7:59, 8:01, 8:02, or 8:03? How on earth am I supposed to know? I mean, anything could happen here. Sean, do you have some insight and want to take a stab at that?
I mean, I think if it was up to Iowa, obviously it depends on who's playing better. Like if it was up to Kirk, I mean, I think you would lean maybe Cade, starting more games, but you never know what can happen, in terms of what, with his legs, how he could respond to certain, movements and whatnot. And, if you got a guy like Brendan Sullivan, it was obvious last year that no matter if this was last year where Cade was coming off one season ending injury, Brendan Sullivan would have probably started the season last year. They just needed to play Cade last year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this year, it's a little different. So I think they'd be more willing to go with Sullivan if they need to start, but I think they're probably still going to try and ride with Cade. But it's close. I mean, the next few weeks are going to be so crucial. And if I were to give a preference, I think from inside the program, I think you would go with Cade. But I think the fact that you have a safer insurance policy with Sullivan, I would maybe take the under.
Yeah, I just don't want them. They did this in the past. They've done this with other quarterbacks, and then he even. I'm thinking of the guy after one of the bowl games made comments that Beathard played too long and all that. He has played injured quarterbacks, and I just don't like that. If I'd rather have 100%, I don't know. I'd rather have Sullivan 100% than Cade be even a little bit injured. And I hope most of the fan base feels the same. Thank you for taking my basketball question. Love the Hawks, and thank you guys for putting on the show.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. And
yeah, thank you, Doug.
I mean, I don't think they've been in a situation where they've been confident with two guys. I think that's more often than not the issue. And I even go back to the Spencer Petras era. Everybody, including myself, was calling for them to play Alex Padilla, give Deuce Hogan or Joe Labus a chance. But Sean,
oh Lord,
they had not recruited well or developed well at quarterback in a long time. And frankly, they didn't develop Nate Stanley very well either. Nate Stanley was kind of the same guy in 17 that he was in 19. You could argue his stats were better in 17 than 19. And yes, we do miss him. Iowa fans miss him. But Iowa's not really developed the quarterback position well in a long time. And the sample size is relatively small as it relates to coaches. They've had Ken O'Keefe coaching quarterbacks. They've had Brian Ferentz coaching quarterbacks. They've had Greg Davis coaching quarterbacks. So that's why I continue to double down on Tim Lester and the effect he can have, not only in the offense, but on the room specifically. D. Rollifson, appreciate the super chat. Hi to Hawkeye Howard, Erica Lemansky. Let's go Hawks. Appreciate that. And D. Rollifson, appreciate this super chat as well. Props to Spencer Lee for an Olympic silver. BB, I'm assuming that stands for basketball. I'm assuming. So hopefully you got your basketball fix there with Doug's call. We're going to take a quick break, folks. We've got a caller. We've got James waiting on hold. And I'm Corey Brady, your host, along with Sean Bock of 247 Sports. We're going to be with you here for a little bit longer. If you have a question for myself, or more specifically Sean, and we are going to talk about IOSE EPENESA here after the break, but if you have a question, feel free to call in via StreamYard. The link is in the description of the video, or you can call us 515-635-1601. 515-635-1601. We'll be back with more Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Straight from the man cave, Kinnick Under the Kitchen. Authentic, original player artwork available for Hawkeye fans across the country. Now, in addition to the classic sign prints of Hawkeye greats like Chuck Long, Torrey Taylor, and Cooper DeJean, more authentic prints are coming, including current Iowa football stars Cade McNamara, Luke Lachey, and Xavier Wampa. There are so many options available. They make great gifts. Plus, your purchase benefits the athletes themselves and your favorite Hawkeye program from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Visit Under the Kitchen on Facebook, visit the stand each year at FryFest, or check out their website, underthekitchen.square.site. Again, that's underthekitchen.square.site. Check out Under the Kitchen today and get your authentic, original Hawkeye print. Always appreciate Under the Kitchen, Randy, and he's been a part of this show for the last couple of years, so we appreciate him. And FryFest is the place to be to check out some of his work in person and say thank you to him for being a part of the work here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. As I mentioned prior to the break, I'm joined by 247 Sports' Sean Bock as we talk about fall camp, what we saw over the weekend, what we heard Friday at Media Day, and then, of course, the topic of recruiting, which Sean specializes in. Before we get to IOSE EPENESA and some final thoughts on football, I do want to add James into the mix. He's been waiting for quite some time. James, thanks for calling in. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Corey, how you doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to have you on, Sean. Obviously, for me, watching just like the recruit, Corey knows I'm a pretty big recruiting guy in the state of Iowa. I kind of follow all that. The one thing I've kind of noticed is weird, and obviously I understand why these kids don't choose that path, right? And I'm not saying I understand why these kids choose what they do, right? Every kid has their own option, right? They have their own choice, and they choose what they think is best for them. I just find it interesting how Iowa hasn't had a quarterback from the state of Iowa in so long.
Well, they
like
were in
Cole,
on
Moberly.
They were in on J.J. Cole, but
yeah,
but Marco was the number one guy in that class.
Yeah,
he had the priority. That's who the staff wanted.
Yeah, I was higher on Marco than I was J.J. Cole, James.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying I find it funny how we haven't got recruits, the quarterback recruits in the state of Iowa who are more of the top guys.
Who would you have suggested they go after in the last how many years?
I'm just saying, between the three that the Iowa State's gotten this year, Cole, Moberly, and then Mansky. Is it Mansky or
Mansky?
Yeah, Mansky. Yeah. Between those three, it seems like I wasn't even an option for any of those three, and that's kind of something maybe I wouldn't look at them as that. That's not what I'm just saying that's kind of funny how I don't think they've looked at anything in that way.
Yeah, JJ Cole was offered. Marco was the main guy. With Moberly, they didn't offer. Because they got I think Moberly kind of emerged. They had him on campus a couple of times, but Razar was the main guy. Mansky, I understand. I think Mansky's I don't know what his ceiling is.
He's only a junior, right?
He's gonna be a senior this year.
Senior this year, yeah, okay, yeah. He was a junior.
Yeah, his floor. He's the guy that Iowa wanted, but Jimmy Sullivan, the opportunity presented itself. Jimmy Sullivan wanted to come to Iowa City. I don't think you turn a guy like Jimmy Sullivan down because I think he is a pretty good fit for what, Tim Lester wants. And the fact that, Iowa still kept him in the class, even with, Lester wasn't even on staff when he committed. But the fact that Lester wanted to keep him, I think was kind of telling of, what, they want in him or what they see in him. Iowa State, or with Mansky, that one's just tough because I think Mansky was a guy that would, I think Iowa State fits him perfectly. I think he's going to do really well there. Because looking back at that, I think he's probably the best, I wouldn't say prospect, but he's definitely the best quarterback of those two. That was one that I'm kind of okay, that one might come back to bite you just a little bit, but it's he was so locked in on Iowa State. And, there have been guys too in the past. Like I look at Jace Bauer from Ankeny, who was
Yeah.
a really good player, but it's like he's at Sam Houston State now.
Yeah.
He's at Sam Houston
He went to
State for
Central
a
Michigan.
reason.
Yeah, he went to Central Michigan before that and then transferred. So
Yep,
Well,
yep,
well,
yeah.
first of
And
all,
it's like he's
can we bring up the biggest name that we haven't brought up, and that's Max Dugan should have been
yeah, Max
offered.
Dugan. Yeah, Max Dugan should have. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even Jackson Smolik too from Dowling
Yeah.
who went to Penn State. Like that's another guy that was
That's true. Yeah.
that was Marco's class, but he like Smolik kind of emerged really late. And yeah, I mean, I I don't know. That's a tough question because the state has some pretty good quarterbacks, but it's also like
But
a lot of these guys that they've had. I mean, the last three guys have been what Central Iowa guys.
yeah. But to
Grew
me,
up
it's
pretty
also
big
like
Iowa State people.
obviously what you've been doing at quarterback hasn't been working. So maybe you try to take a hit on trying to get somebody in the state, maybe seeing if that kind of hits something. Because obviously what you've been doing hasn't been working. If that makes sense. I'm not trying to hate on everybody that's been in that room, right? And I'm not trying to deny anybody that's been in that room, right? But maybe if you push harder for somebody differently, maybe it would have went a different way.
Here's the other thing, James, or maybe hire the right people that can more effectively A, recruit, and B, develop. They haven't had Brian. We don't need to just rip on Brian this whole
That's
time.
That's not what I'm here to do.
But that's what I'm here to do, because here's the deal. Brian has been a part of this offense and the recruiting process. And hey, even if you're not quote unquote recruiting certain people, certain quarterbacks, let's not forget that you are the coordinator representing the offense. And so what reason do people have, what reason do elite quarterbacks have to come to a place where it's coached by a former offensive lineman calling plays and coaching quarterbacks? So I think that's part of it. Did you mention, anybody mention Rocky Lombardi?
No, Rocky Lombardi's a good one too.
But he ended up in Northern Illinois, so.
But he went. I mean, he did go to Michigan State though out of high school. So obviously somebody saw something in him. At a Big Ten level. Obviously, he wasn't that great at Michigan State. And injuries kind of hurt him there. But like people did see him kind of as that potential, maybe a Big Ten quarterback. A team at least did see that. So. But no, for me, it was just interesting to see how I feel like this year's state, compared to where they're going, has kind of panned out. Obviously, we got Thomas Meyer, who's the number one player right now in the state. But like everything else, pretty much just went Iowa State's way. It's kind of interesting to see that way.
But the previous cycle was all Iowa.
All Iowa. Yeah, so it kind of flipped, and it usually has a tendency to flip back and forth. Where one year will be Iowa State, the next year will be Iowa, then the next year will be Iowa State. But
yeah, anything else, James?
Yeah, I mean,
no, go ahead, Sean. I was just.
No, I was just going to say, too, it's like you look at – I mean, I know it's a little different now because, obviously rankings can change and stuff, and this is kind of more of a top-heavy class. But it's like, obviously Iowa wanted Mansky. Limbaugh they liked, but it's like they had a couple of other guys that they wanted over him. They didn't offer Will Hawthorne, didn't offer Will Tompkins, didn't offer Malachi Kirby, didn't offer Ethan Stecker. Xavier Robinson, honestly – I don't know why we have him as 10th in the class. I think he's probably more of a top 4, top 3 guy. But, I think last year you look at the class, and I think that was pretty impressive, how they were able to get some of those guys over Iowa State and, just, how much they were able to dominate. But it's like with this class with Iowa, it's like, these guys, Iowa didn't really offer most of these guys. But, I think Iowa State, I mean, not to talk about the Cyclones too much, I think those guys are really good players at Iowa State. But, I think Iowa flexed its muscles out of state this class a little bit too, which is, pretty reassuring for a lot of people.
And obviously that's something I think I know Corey's giving credit to them about this too, like how they've recruited running backs to the state of Florida, how they've recruited some of these positions in different states, I think that's something we don't look at enough in Kirk, right? Like, yeah, he's recruited really good. I mean, even DBs in Chicago a little bit with like Khalil Tate, John Nestor, Jamari Harris, like he's recruited in Chicago pretty well in the DB room. Running backs out of Florida, like I said, like they've recruited pretty well out of state at certain positions, and it's kind of interesting to see that that's what they choose sometimes, that they pluck those guys out of those states and they keep going there and it keeps working most of the time.
Terrell Washington is what, a Texas kid?
Texas,
Caleb Johnson's an Ohio kid. So they've went a lot of different places for these guys.
Yeah, for sure. And most of the time it seems to work out in the right way. But one more thing I was going to say before I left, we were talking about quarterbacks earlier. It is interesting to see how like most of the quarterbacks who you were kind of ripping Brian earlier, so I'm gonna rip Brian a little bit, right? It is kind of interesting to see how those quarterbacks that did transfer didn't really go anywhere, other than obviously Deuce, who went to Kentucky, but now he's at New Mexico State, so like really that's nothing special either, right? But
he was a walk-on at Kentucky.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, but now he's on scholarship at New Mexico State, so like obviously there's nothing. But I'm saying it's weird how you could kind of tell that obviously it didn't go anywhere special after that, right? So we kind of grew
Yeah, I
up a
mean,
little bit more for that. But
I was thinking, if we talk about in-state quarterbacks, there was one right up the road from Iowa City, Cam Miller, who is pretty good at North Dakota State. That was
Yeah.
another guy I forgot. I thought he was gonna be a portal target at some point, but I guess
Never
if
left
you,
it, though.
you go to a program like North Dakota State and you thrive there, and Iowa doesn't offer you, you kind of maybe have a little sour taste in your mouth, and yeah, I don't know if Iowa offered him or like obviously they probably wouldn't have tampered with him, but you know the opportunity comes about maybe if you watch
Yeah.
Iowa football and you see they need a quarterback and you're from here. But I mean, if you stay at North Dakota State, you got a pretty good gig. They've had a pretty good track record with producing quarterbacks up there.
Another Iowa name before I get off real quick, and obviously Corey's gonna know why I say this, but Jackson Daly, who went to Arkansas State, he's now at UNI, so Corey's obviously gonna kind of laugh at why I said that now with the last part. But that was another kid too. Obviously, I don't know how good he was because he went to Arkansas State, obviously, but he's at UNI now, so that's kind of interesting one too. But
Well, I appreciate you calling in, James. We'll have to have Sean back so you can talk recruiting because James is you're a recruiting guy, James. So we appreciate
yeah, for
that.
sure. I try to stay up on it. That's how Kirk does it nowadays. So you kind of gotta look at recruiting because Kirk doesn't really go to the portal. So you got to be interested and stay interested in recruiting, not as much as the portal aspect of things. But
Absolutely.
all
right, sir.
Enjoy your night.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, Cam Miller, Randy Hedberg up at North Dakota State. That's a fascinating place to go and play quarterback, given the success that they've had. You talk about Tim Lester with receivers. How about North Dakota State with unheralded quarterbacks over the course of time? And now, of course, different system there with Tim Polasek, but I think it's largely going to be the same. And my understanding is Randy is still there. So very interesting. We've got a few comments here, questions in the chat, and we're going to get to IOSE EPENESA. But let's kind of run quick fire on some of these questions. T. Hink wants to know, have you heard anything? And I have not. Maybe you have, Sean. Anything on intel on how Cade has responded since the rough day on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that he had a pretty good practice on Monday from what, I've heard. And, how much of that is, kind of just telling people what they want to hear. But I think, there's some good validity to that. I think there is a, belief that he's the type of guy, too, that he's going to take that. And, I think he's got the mental side of it where, he's going to really push and he's going to, kind of take that, as like, hey, like I need to, get off, kind of figure things out a little bit or, kind of, push myself a little bit more. And, I think he, is taking that to heart. And, from what I've heard, he's had a pretty good week so far. I know Monday was really good. Well, I haven't heard too much about Tuesday and Wednesday, but it sounds encouraging right now, but it's like we've heard the practice stuff before. So,
yeah.
And
well,
it is what it is.
I'm guessing maybe you and I heard the same thing a week prior regarding you and I chatted a little bit about this at Kids Day, but it sounds like Jacob Gill had a big weekend the weekend prior to Kids Day. None of that is consistent with what we saw. There's another reason why I even though Kirk's comments afterwards made it sound like, yes, this has been a consistent theme, the inconsistent struggles. I've heard flashes. You've heard flashes with people like Jacob Gill, and I've heard flashes with Brendan Sullivan. So I think there's reason for optimism as it relates to the passing game. And let's see. Doc wants to know if we're going to be calling for Marco by halftime of the ISU game. No, I don't think that's going to happen. You may be calling for him, Doc B, but I don't think so. Joe wants to know about place kicking. Well, no, we haven't talked about that because it's one of the most non-interesting position battles because there's really no battle. Drew Stevens is the guy, and they better hope he stays healthy because Trip Woody is not ready. And I like Trip a lot. Nice young guy. He is not ready.
I will say it was reassuring. Ready. I will say it's reassuring that Kirk said he's kind of a totally new person from the spring because I know he struggled a lot in the spring. But yeah, it's going to take some time, I think, for Trip Woody. And, they have Scott Starzik coming in too, so they like him a lot. So that'll be fascinating to kind of see how that battle goes.
And don't be surprised if they've shown the willingness to add people in the portal, walk on kickers in the portal. They did it with Marshall Meter last year. Would not be shocked to see them do that again here at some point. Casey wants to know, would I start Cade or would I start Sullivan? I would do exactly what I think is going to happen week 1. I would go both. It doesn't matter to me who sets foot on the field first. I'd play both of them. CDD wants to know if the players prefer Cade or Sullivan. I'll toss that one to you, Sean.
Oh, you throwing that at my court? I mean, imagine the balls that someone would have to ask this question to the players.
But they wouldn't answer. Nobody's going to answer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, not in a formal setting.
I think, at least for the receivers, it's whoever's getting them the ball more consistently.
I think Jacob Gill would say Brendan Sullivan if he was being honest. I mean, that's his guy. It's his roommate.
Yeah.
Those guys have been roommates.
Just never admit that on record, but yeah, I mean, that would be a good assumption.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if Luke Lachey said Cade McNamara. I think there's some bias at certain places, and that's natural. So
think about this though, Corey. Caleb Brown or Cade McNamara has never completed a pass in game to Caleb Brown.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's not act like Caleb Brown is. I mean, how many passes did he catch last year as a whole? I mean,
yeah, true. I'm just saying, like it came way later on. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. No, it was after the injury. The real Hayden says they weren't going to open up the playbook for Kids Day, but are they actually going to open it up during the season? That is the question. Yeah, I don't think we can really answer that question. We'll have to wait and see. But I have confidence in Tim Lester's ability to call a game. CJ says, didn't we try to play 2 quarterbacks in 2014 and it went horribly? Well, first of all, 2014. So that was, you're right. That was 2000. I'm trying to think, when did they play 2 quarterbacks? They played 2 quarterbacks against Pitt that year. Sean, you probably weren't even around in 2014, right? What were you doing in 2014?
Sophomore in high school.
All right. So you weren't paying attention.
Probably cheering on the Indiana Hoosiers.
All right. 2014, did they play? I don't even know if they played Indiana. That was a really good 2013 was a really good room, right? They had Rudock, Beathard, and Cody Sokol, who went on to put up big numbers at Louisiana Tech. But there was stuff going on behind the scenes with that whole Beathard Rudock thing, and I'm sure you've caught wind of some of that stuff, Sean. Like there was stuff, and of course that led to Jake Rudock transferring and CJ Beathard taking over in 15. So different circumstances. This team is much more veteran laden than that 2014 team was. Doc P says, any word on the superstar recruit that played receiver and DB in high school? I believe Phil gets him on D. Oh, who are we talking about? Who's that in reference to?
Who plays receiver? Jalen Watson, maybe?
Well, this made it sound like it's somebody they haven't gotten yet. But I could be wrong. Doc P, explain yourself. Who's the kid that the receiver that was on campus here in June that didn't commit? I don't think he's committed anymore.
Terrence Smith.
Has he committed anywhere?
Yeah, I don't know if no, he hasn't. It's still Iowa and Minnesota. That's a guy that it's a very fascinating recruitment because he hasn't committed anywhere, and usually, like, unless you're like a 5-star or like really top guy, if you come on campus in June, like you end up committing like 2 or 3 weeks or a week after the visit.
Yeah, days.
He's the one guy that's like, I think On3 might have him as a 4-star. We have him as a 3-star, but he's a composite 4-star. He's a good player, don't get me wrong, but like it's a little bit of an interesting recruitment for him to be taken into the fall. But you look at his top options, and those are kind of Iowa, Minnesota. Like, what have those passing offenses really showed in the last couple of years? So I get the concern that he kind of wants to see both of them. And I just saw that for a question from Otto, the update on Terrence Smith. I would say it's kind of like it's as close to 50-50 to 51-49 as you could get. I think Iowa has, some stuff going for him because, they got more to sell because it's a new offense and, he's not really paying attention to the old stuff. And, that's reassuring, but it's like you got to put that product on the field. That's going to be the main thing that really helps Iowa in this recruitment. And, Minnesota, I think, has 3 wide receivers already committed in this class, too. A couple of the guys are the same size as Smith. So I think that could potentially play a role. But the fact that he hasn't committed just yet, like, is a little like, okay, no one really seems to have a great idea of what things are looking at right now. And there's always a chance, too, he could pick up more offers and in the fall if he decides to wait that long. And, It's kind of a recruitment too, where I can kind of maybe see it going up until signing day, depending on if he commits early or not, or who he commits to. So it's pretty fluid, I would say.
The one thing Minnesota has done in the last 10 years is they have produced really good receivers, although that offense
Yeah.
hasn't been the best at times, like Rashad Bateman, Ottman Bell, Johnson. Like, you can go down the list. They've had good tight ends, with Brevin Spanford and with was it Croft or whoever that dude was. So, that's working in Minnesota's favor, and those are the battles. If you're Iowa right now and you're trying to turn the corner with recruiting quarterbacks, especially I think receivers would be at the top of that list. Who are you battling more often than not? Unless you're just consistently going out to other parts of the country and then you're battling schools out there, you're battling the Iowa States, the Minnesotas, the Nebraskas. All of those teams have had better wide receiver play than Iowa, and it's not even close. Frankly, all those teams have had better running back play as well, maybe with the exception being Nebraska, but Iowa State and Minnesota have been slam dunk places for backs. So, interesting conversation on Terrence Smith. And it sounds like Doc P was referring to Jalen Watson. So, as far as right now, Jalen Watson said Friday that he's focused on being a DB. And he was asked about playing both ways, but that's, I don't think, in the cards anytime soon. And he could always play as a freshman. Guys play early, Sean, at that position at corner. I'm assuming would be at corner. Phil's not afraid to play young guys if need be, and injuries tend to hit that room.
Yeah, I mean, he's more of a special teams guy, I'd say his first year, if anything. But you look at this freshman class too, and guys like Derek Weiskopf, Cam Buffington, those are two guys that really come to mind from this freshman class in terms of, playing on special teams along with Rice-Dakin. So I think those are more the guys that you look at than Jalen Watson. And Jalen Watson's a pretty good prospect though. He's a little small, like that's a little bit of a discouraging thing. I think he's around like 5'10", maybe 5'9", I'd say, probably around 5'10". But he ran in the 4.4s at Iowa's camp last year, so he's got some speed to him. And you never want to sleep on a quarterback that Phil Parker really wants, and they really wanted Jalen Watson. So I wouldn't expect a major impact this year, but in terms of special teams impact, I'm not putting that out of the question with any of these freshmen. But two guys I'm really looking at are Cam Buffington and Derek Weiskopf, two Eastern Iowa guys, and maybe even Preston Reese too.
Special teams.
Yeah, special teams. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Austin wants to know: are there any football recruits that some of us may not be aware of from the state of Iowa who may end up at Iowa? Anybody flying under the radar, Sean?
Man, you guys really got me thinking now. I imagine this question is in terms of like under the radar type guys, not like guys that, 2026 class that they offered that no one's really talking about. Okay. I was kind of hoping it was a 2026 one, but I figured it was under the radar.
You can go 2026 if you want.
I mean, there's really
bunch of guys.
I mean, I imagine there's a couple guys that you'll see pop up. I don't have names right now, but I think there are a couple guys that they're keeping an eye. I know there's a couple guys that they're keeping an eye on that could potentially pop up. And I mean, look at the 2024 class too with the walk-ons. Those defensive backs I think are really encouraging. Like, Kyler Girardi from North Scott had an interception on Saturday. I don't remember who he probably picked off. Was it Brendan Sullivan? Might have been Sullivan. So you never know. I mean, with NIL too, like there could be some guys that are committed to FCS schools on scholarship that Iowa can take on as walk-ons. So you might see some of those guys. But right now, I mean, if you're looking at positions, like there's always potential for Iowa to add a defensive back, maybe a defensive lineman. I'm not sure right now. There's an encouraging one out of Sioux City that I think could be, pretty. I can't pronounce his name, but he could be, one to watch down the line. But if you're looking for any positions, probably defensive line and defensive back right now.
And Iowa never. I asked this question because it's 5-minute drive for me. They never pulled the trigger on Will Hawthorne.
Nope.
at Gilbert. He just committed to Iowa State less than a week ago. Erica, appreciate the super chat. Any women's basketball intel currently? I've heard Coach Jay is doing a great job. Man, it's been a few weeks since I've even given women's basketball a thought. I talked with Taylor Strimlow on this show last month, and it's kind of in women's hoops mode. And then, with Big Ten Media Days, it's like we just turned full-fledged into Iowa football. Anything on the women's basketball front, Sean, that you care to offer? Do you do much with women's basketball?
I mean, I'll dilly-dally into it, nothing really serious. That's more of David's kind of forte. I mean, Lucy Olson, that's an obvious one. She's not going to be Caitlin Clark. She's not. I don't think she can shoot the three as well, but she got a good mid-range game. That's kind of been the talk. They really like her. I mean, they've embraced her. Obviously, expectations are going to be crazy for her coming into this year because I think a lot of people are, kind of going to say, okay, she's stepping into Caitlin's role, which she's kind of doing, but she's definitely a different player, and I think it's going to be more of a well-rounded group. To kind of put together the team that they want to be. And I mean, I don't think top 25 is out of the question, but that's kind of all I got right now. I will note there were a couple. I did write earlier in the summer that there were a couple of players that they were pretty excited about. Obviously, Taylor McCabe stepping into that role, and then Jada has been a really good presence. Not just down low but on the perimeter, and they really want to see her step up. So. There was some really, really positive talk about her early on.
Would like to see her really take a step, and would like to see AJ Ediger really take a step.
Yeah. And then Aaliyah Guyton too. I mean, I don't know what her, timeline is right now, but they potentially see her having a role when she gets back. And had it not been for her injury, she probably would have started this year, at least, given them a push. And Ava Heiden's probably going to start at that 5 spot next year too. So I know they're really excited about her as well. And she probably could have started last year, honestly, at the 5. That's not my words. That's, a few other people's words. So yeah, I mean, it should be a really encouraging team. But yeah, I'm kind of all in football right now.
Yeah, I think everybody is, except Doug, who called in earlier. He's all in on men's basketball. Brett wants to know over under 25 points per game. I think that's a great goal. I don't know where that would place them nationally as it relates to rankings, but
yeah,
I'd say I'd take the. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I go over under 25 points per game, Sean.
I would just say a little over.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, they weren't even close to 25 points per game by the end of last year. So if you're a little over 25, I think that's a great place to start. And they do have good defense. I mean, as I mentioned, some of those September teams are probably more difficult assignments than some people think. And then Wisconsin's always good defensively. Ohio State's maybe the best defense in the country. Nebraska should be pretty good defensively. They've still got tough assignments. There's going to be games where they're going to struggle to score, but at the same time, Iowa's defense is going to keep them in those games. Let's see. Bassmaster TV says, do you think a 9-3 team makes the playoffs? If Iowa's 9-3, they're not making the playoffs.
No.
And I doubt that there's someone else, unless it's a conference champion, of course, with the new format. If Iowa State's 9-3, they win the Big 12. Yeah, they're in the playoff. But from an at-large perspective, I think that's very unlikely. Austin, I think he's expanding, I think he's kind of expanding on his question earlier. Metro kids, any Metro kids that are not getting recruited that should be getting recruited in any of the upcoming classes?
This is defensive lineman from Urbandale, who's pretty dang good. I can't remember the name right now. He had a couple FCS offers in I think it was April and May. He was a really good prospect. I know there's one out of Des Moines North, Wisdom. I think his name was Wisdom Fody, who had a Kansas State offer at one point. His recruitment's been pretty quiet. He was a linebacker athlete type. Maybe he's one of those late guys. Iowa takes a shot on. We'll see there. Man.
That's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you those answers.
Yeah, no, that's good enough. And I see a bunch of people. People want us to talk about IOSE. I see the comment here from Clips. I see Tyler. So, what's the latest? I know he was in the stands at Kinnick, but people want to know about the future for IOSE EPENESA. Who was it the other day? Was it? I should know this, but somebody crystal balled or casted him to Iowa. Um, where would you rate Iowa's chances right now? And are we close to seeing a decision?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's, kind of interesting because they do such a good job of keeping things close to the vest, and it's hard to read like the tea leaves of it, but you can kind of get some tea leaves of it. Going back last month, I had heard that Iowa and Utah were the two teams to watch. Obviously, Miami is going to continue to say that they're in it because, you know, they they've won some pretty big battles, and they've obviously boosted some of their NIL to win some of these battles. And the Epinesa recruitment I think is a little bit different in that regard, and I think that's something that helps out Iowa too, with that. But I mean, my thing is like you got to be a little cautious about him going to Iowa because his brother's on the team. They're a pretty close family. That was probably in the cards. But also you look at it, it's like, okay, I don't know exactly what Yosei had going on that day, but there have been plenty of times in the past where the Epinesas haven't really made it up to Iowa City, or Yosei hasn't made up to Iowa City because he has something going on at Edwardsville. So there's like it's an interesting, thing that, can kind of come to be. And, I've heard too from a couple of sources that like they've really shut it down the last couple of weeks in terms of talking to college coaches. Like they haven't really had a lot of contact with coaches. I know I heard from the Utah side that, they hadn't really been into contact with the OSA as much, but, they were still kind of coming up to make a big push. And Iowa does a good job of, kind of backing off a little bit, but like knowing that, okay, we still got to recruit this kid, but also like, how much can we really recruit him like more going forward, if that makes sense? Like they've known the kid since he was, you know, probably basically a child. Um, so there's really how much can you really recruit him moving forward? And I think Iowa does a good job, like I said before, just stepping back and being like, okay, like we can stay in touch, we can stay in contact, but we're not really going to push you, but we're going to continue to say they want you. And I think that's something that the Epinesa family appreciates. And yeah, I mean, as far as like actual intel on it, like I said, I mean, I've continued to hear that, um, it's been Iowa and Utah, and that's continued to be kind of the buzz there. And I know some people have talked about Penn State, and there's seems like there's a different school thrown in there every other week, but Iowa and Utah are the main ones that I continue to hear about, and I continue to feel good about. And it's one of those ones too where I wonder if like the Epinesa family is starting to say, or like Yosei is starting to say, like, okay, Iowa kind of has everything I need. Like, I wanted to see those schools and like see what they had to offer, but you know, even with that, it's like I always come back to Iowa. Like, that's something that I can really picture him saying at some point is, Iowa's always kind of been there, and Iowa, I've always kind of compared stuff to Iowa. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but that's just kind of the vibe I get from it. And just having those family ties, I think, really help too. But it sounds like I keep hearing conflicting things. I keep hearing, Iowa is the one that's going to get him, and I keep hearing that it's not over yet. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting debate, but I would peg Iowa as the leader right now.
And to make clear, you mentioned this earlier, Sean, but for anybody that, again, overreacting to him being in Kinnick, great. But let's keep in mind his older brother is on the team. So Eric, even though he doesn't play, people need to realize he is a walk-on and he is on the team. So there's reason for that family to be in the stands. And it was a dead period, so he wasn't going to be an official visitor anyways. You brought that up to me during the scrimmage, but he was in the stands. I know he was noticed. Mason Woods was in the stands. His dad coaches here. so there's
I don't think Mason Woods misses a practice misses a live practice at least. I think he's been there like the last 4 years or something, like every time there's a open practice.
So we'll be anxious to follow the IOSE EPENESA recruitment as perhaps it winds to a close. Pugmaster, appreciate the super sticker and the comment. Let's get the comment up on the board. Looking forward to the season and the call-in show after Iowa's wins. It's going to be a banner year in the old Bender household, as Iowa is going to be a team to reckon with. Go Hawks. Appreciate that, Pugmaster. Thanks for the positive remarks. BJ wants to know if Marco Lainez has improved. I've heard he has. I don't know to what extent. But do you think the system complements him as some people expected it to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like you said earlier in the show, like I think the RPOs fit him well. I think some of these, shorter passes and some of these routes that, they kind of set up for the quarterbacks, I think works better in his favor. It's just a matter of accuracy and kind of piecing things together, because I know accuracy was something that he might have struggled with a little earlier on, and throw power and, kind of that whole deal, and, kind of just being consistent. And, if he can figure that out and, kind of take things in, I mean, their focus right now is on McNamara and Sullivan. But there's a belief that Lainez can take that next step this year and, kind of propel himself moving forward. So we'll see. I mean, I've heard he's, improved a little bit, but it's like, I don't want to say he's like, elevated.
Codester 91, great comment. I totally agree. It will be intriguing to follow not only Deacon Hill at Utah Tech, but Joe Labus at Central Michigan, Spencer Petras at Utah State, and let's not forget another guy who's competing for a starting job is Deuce Hogan. Deuce Hogan down at is it New Mexico State? So
yep, Carson May at Abilene Christian.
Yes, Carson May is at Abilene Christian. Yes. So here's a question. I'm guessing they don't play in the same conference. Does Utah Tech play Abilene Christian? Will we get to see Deacon Hill versus Carson May?
It stinks though, because they weren't on the same roster, or they weren't on this team at the same time.
Hey, they're both Iowa products. So even though neither of them were from Iowa originally, that would be that would be intriguing. New Mexico State's FBS, so if Deuce Hogan can win that job, hey, there's another former Iowa quarterback starting somewhere.
Yeah, they're in Conference USA, aren't they?
Either that or the WAC? I thought they were in the WAC. One of those conferences
maybe
that mean little to me. They're not Mountain West. I don't know what they are, but they're FBS.
They're in Conference USA starting in 2023. So yeah, they I remember I played them because Appalachian State was my dynasty team in NCAA 25. So we played we played New Mexico State.
Oh my goodness. This CJ, this got to be a joke. CJ says September 28th it's Abilene at Tech.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
We need to start doing. Maybe I'll do a post-game show after that game. Well, who does Iowa? That's Minnesota week. I wonder when that game is at Utah Tech. So it might be a late game.
Yeah, no, it's at
8 p.m. kick. Okay.
Oh my God. Wow.
Hey, we might be the first Hawkeye podcast, Sean, that has figured that out or had somebody figure that out. That's incredible when you think about it. Deacon Hill versus Carson May. And I have no idea who to pick. BJ says, hey, Corey, saw you ask Lester about waste downs. I interpreted his answer near the end as it's Kirk's call. I thought I thought he answered the question wonderfully, frankly, because he basically stated what I'd expect an adequate coordinator and a confident coordinator to say, that, hey, I'm going to voice my opinion, but ultimately critical down situations in general, BJ, are going to be the call of the head coach. Now, I get it. 2nd and 1 may not be considered a critical down situation. I have not talked to Don Patterson since that answer, but it's clear Tim Lester believes in waste downs, unlike his predecessor. So that's a positive thing. And I could go back and show everybody the data from last year. And if people want to say, well, they didn't have any waste downs to use. Not the case. They just didn't use them. When they had waste downs last year, they almost every time ran the football. And I don't see that happening. I don't think Kirk's going to more often than not overrule Tim, but I'm just guessing. All right. We haven't seen that in play yet. Brett says it's Utah Tech's homecoming night, that game against Abilene. That is going to be fascinating. I hope both those guys win the job. Jen wants to know about the recruitment of Nick Brooks. Where is that at right now?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa took Lucas Allgaier, and they only took. I think they're only going to take 3 offensive linemen in this class, and Allgaier was kind of the guy that they wanted over Brooks, and kind of just fizzled out.
So
And
is it
he's
done?
probably
That
going to
ship
end up.
has sailed?
Yeah, he moved back to Georgia, actually.
Heard
So
that.
yeah, he moved back to Georgia, and um, yeah, I think it's down to either like Texas or Georgia. I know USC is in there, but I think Texas and Georgia are the final 2. I don't know. I've really stopped paying attention to that after.
Was that an attitude thing, or because here's the deal?
I just don't think he was a fit like for what Iowa wanted. Offensive lineman wise, I don't think he was a fit for like what Barnett wanted, just in like a prototype. Because he's not a finished product physically by any means, and it was going to take him time. And I think there were some things that maybe wouldn't have made him a good fit at Iowa in terms of like he's yeah. I mean, I just think it wasn't. I just think it wasn't a fit.
Okay. I'm not going to speculate on that. I will say this: if it was just about football, I have a hard time seeing them evaluating Lucas Allgaier ahead of Nick Brooks, based on the little bit of tape I've seen. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
There's got to be other stuff going on there, and maybe I'm wrong. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. I know when we've had Tom Kakert on the show, he's talked about how close Nick Brooks is to his family. But I had heard that here, a month ago or less than a month ago, that he was moving back to Georgia. And,
Yeah, I mean that's Tom's right on that. Like he is very close to his family, very tight knit with his family. But it's just like it's a weird. I think there's different people coming from different places, and it's kind of one of those. I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much either. But yeah, I just don't think it was a. I also think like I don't think Brooks is the type of athlete that I was looking for at tackle.
okay.
As opposed to, I've seen him play and he's a good high school player, but it's like, how quick can you adjust that to the Big Ten? And I mean, not necessarily just the Big Ten, but the college game. Like, he's not very quick. Obviously, he needs to lose a lot of weight, but it's like, I don't know. It's kind of just leave it at that.
Coil Stipulate says, what is your confidence in Coach Budmeyer? I'm in a wait and see mode because everybody knows I'm very skeptical about it. I thought he was very good with the media. I chatted with him for 10 minutes on Friday. Where are you at right now with Budmeyer coaching the receivers?
I'm definitely wait and see too. I mean, I think, he's got experience like being an offensive coordinator, but that was for a year at Colorado State. And, obviously that staff ended up leaving. So, yeah, I'm in very much wait and see. I mean, they like the guy. I think winning like a recruitment like Terrence Smith would be good in terms of like, okay, you can recruit these kind of guys. But in terms of a developer, like that's very wait and see. Like I think Lester's offense is going to help that room a lot, but I'm very wait and see with him too in terms of like how he can take that room to the next level.
Otto wants to know about freshman playing time. Terrell Washington is not a true freshman, but yes, he's going to play. True freshman playing. I've given that thought, Sean, and I think what you said earlier, Cam Buffington, Weisskopf, that's where you got to look at as it relates to special teams. I thought heading into the year before I heard anything about fall camp, and I've heard very little about the receivers, I'd say the guys I had pegged as having the best chances of playing early, one would be KJ Parker because of his potential speed and being kind of the prototypical Lester looking receiver, if you will. I've heard mixed reviews there, but it sounds like he's flashed. I don't know if he's got a chance of playing early. LeVar Woods brought up Reese Vanderzee. I was surprised when I asked him about the return game, and he brought up Reese as maybe being a guy that mixes in there. So that surprised me. Anybody else that we mentioned Weisskopf and Buffington, anybody else I'm missing as a true freshman? Jalen Watson certainly would be in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Reese. I mean, obviously Reese Dakin is a punter, but that's an obvious one.
Yeah.
But yeah, Vanderzee. I mean, he had a catch on Saturday, and I thought that was I think he was getting snaps with the twos. I know they have Jerry Bowie working at the X right now, and Vanderzee, you can kind of put him at the X, and I think that's the Z that you can put him at that spot too. but he kind of fits the mold of the X, where he's like 6'4", 210, and he's pretty athletic. But I know they have Bowie. I think Bowie's kind of ahead of him right now. But yeah, I mean I'm encouraged by Reese. I think he has potential to. Tyler Barnes, I remember, said he was going to take some time with him, but the fact that he was getting snaps with the twos on Saturday, I think that's pretty encouraging.
People are asking in the chat about Joey Van Wetzingen. How do you feel about him? Is it too early to discuss Jackson DeJean? We could be here all night talking about some of these products, but anything to offer on either of those guys?
I mean, I think Joey's a perfect fit at the center position. Like, he fits the mold, obviously, of like kind of the Tyler Linderbaum, Leighton Jones type guys who were pretty dang good wrestlers in high school and, are kind of built like Bulldogs a little bit, but still have, kind of that, they have some height to them. And, Joey can play guard or center. I think he's more of like, I honestly, from the beginning, I was like, he's a perfect fit at center. Like, he just looks like an Iowa center. He plays a bit of D tackle for Pleasant Valley because he has to. And, he's probably obviously he's the best guy on that team, but he's a really good center. And, I think his wrestling background too is really going to help him. And, it's just going to continue to be a matter of how much, he wants to improve and how much he wants. I'm not knocking his motor at all, but that's one of the big things with the offensive lineman is like, how much do you really, want to get to that point? And I think, the fact that Iowa was so in early on him, I think that's really telling of what they like. And I think he fits that aggressive, like kind of physical mold where, he really doesn't he obviously thinks when he's playing, but he's more out there kind of just run guys over. Like that's kind of his thing. He's also a smart player, but he wants to be physical and he wants to play physical. And with Jackson DeJean, we had him in the ranked at number 26 in our initial 2027 rankings. Four-sport athlete, a really good four-sport athlete. Hit like 570 this year in baseball as a freshman, which is insane. Like I know they play like smaller competition up there, but like that's really freaking good. He's 6'4", 210. I mean, I don't think he's the freak that Cooper was, like athletic wise. Like I haven't really seen him enough, but those athletic traits and having another brother that plays in the college game and obviously Cooper, like there's a lot to like there. And he's already a big freaking kid. I mean, 6'4", 210. And I don't even know if he has his driver's license yet. Like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Danimal wants to know about how Caleb Johnson looked on Saturday. I don't really know what to offer there. He didn't stand out, nor did he stand out in a bad way? I guess I didn't really notice.
I thought he had a couple nice runs on Saturday. He was kind of the guy that I really liked in the running back room. Like he was kind of the guy that I was keeping a good eye on. And it's tough, Corey, because you're looking at these, that you're watching it and you're like trying to observe other things. So then you miss other things and you're kind of like, okay, like how, like who did what? Like you kind of got to go off what other people say too. And unless you look back and watch a couple times, but I thought Caleb was pretty good.
Tony says, hey, Sean, I was up, let's see, how was Michigan? I'm still up in Michigan City, Indiana, as I mentioned on your board. Do you have any good or bad feelings about the upcoming men's hoops team? So we're back to basketball before we wind this thing down.
Yeah, Tony, I didn't run into you. I got back about a week ago. I'll be up there again soon. I'm going up to Saugatuck in the weekend before it's the weekend before the season opener. But yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic. I am. I know, the talk has kind of been that obviously, talk is talk, but they're a lot farther ahead at this time or like in June than they were last year in June. There were a lot of really question marks with this team that, they were kind of concerned about. But this year, like, I've heard like they feel like they're 100 times better. Like it was some number like that. I mean, obviously it's an exaggeration, but they feel that they were 100 times better in June this year than they were in June last year. And, there's only so much you can take away from that, but they're going to have a deep squad. It's just a matter of like, what lineups can you figure out? Can you get guys like Peyton Samford to be, 100% consistent? What does that guard play look like? Can those, freshmen from last year who are going to be sophomores this year take that next leap? Because that's going to be so critical to have those guys on the bench make some pretty big leaps. And I think the ceiling is second week weekend, I want to say. I mean, that's a little. I mean, that's a little touchy right now. That's the Miller. That's the one Miller Lite talking a little bit.
When you haven't done it since 1999.
But I'm saying that's a ceiling. The floor is NIT. Like that's the floor. Like that's at the worst it can go, but that's not where you want to be. Like people are want this team to be on with tournament team, especially after last year. And it's I'm optimistic, but it's just like, can this team? Is it going to be a volatile team, or is it going to be Can they ride the wave and be consistent? Like that's the big thing with me. I think there's a lot more pieces that you can build around. Like I think there's a lot more. I think they're a deeper team, and I think there's more well-rounded than last year. And I mean, experience is a big thing too. But it's like you got to have Peyton Sanford, you got to have Josh Dix, you got to have Owen Freeman. Those guys need to be all conference like caliber players.
Like if you get if Josh Dix has an all conference type of year, they get a chance to be the second weekend.
Yeah,
I think Verdict's very much. I don't know what to expect from Drew Thelwell. Obviously, he had pretty good tape at Moorhead, but totally different level. I mean, I thought he played okay in one game against Illinois. That is obviously one that is worthwhile comparing. I think Seydou Traore is going to have a major factor in what they do this year. I just think with his athleticism, his ability to defend, protect the rim, Logi, how does he develop? I think Owen Freeman's the best player on the team. And
really?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
We'll talk about this in basketball. Let's talk about this in basketball season.
Let's talk about it a basketball season. But I think Owen Freeman's on his way to probably a second. I mean, he's got to be able. Here's the deal: he's got to learn how to defend without fouling. That's a big thing. That's where he struggled the most last year, I thought.
Silly fouls too.
Oh, and just over and over, game after game, it just didn't get fixed. So I think if he figures that out, because here's the deal: early in his freshman season, you're getting tons of shot blocks because people weren't faking him out of his shoes. But as the season went on and more tape was out on Owen Freeman, people were getting him up and they were getting him in. So I think you're going to see all Big Ten level season from Freeman. If Peyton Sanford can avoid one of those long droughts that he's had in his career at times, especially that one a couple of years ago to start the season out, they got a chance, I think, to finish top third of the Big Ten. That's with the expanded Big Ten. So that's another thing. We're talking about football and how the additions of the 4 West Coast teams affects Kirk Ferentz's squad. But how about the additions of a really good several really good programs? Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington's been a pretty good team at times. The Big Ten got a lot better in basketball as well with those additions. So follow Sean over at 247 and also S Bock 247 on X if you want to follow him on Twitter. I'm sure he'd appreciate it, and you can catch all of his work over at 247 Sports. And I'm curious, Sean, is there anything I'm missing or anything you've heard over the last few days as it relates to fall camp buzz? We've talked a little bit about, I think we talked about Cade McNamara having a good day Monday, but is there anything since we got to see this team in person on Saturday?
Not a whole ton. I'm hoping to work the phones a little bit, the next couple of days. And I know they have like a big scrimmage on Saturday, so I might kind of wait till then to kind of talk to sources about it, because I don't want to, kind of push them too much, because this is the time of year where, you're kind of like, okay, like, what's this guy doing? What's this guy doing? How's this guy? It's like, you don't want to push too much, So I'm kind of reserving a little bit for later in the week, but we'll see. We'll see when it comes, and obviously we'll have updates over on our site, and Corey, I know you'll have updates over here too. So I'm looking forward to the next couple of next couple of weeks. It's getting late, Corey. It's past my bedtime, man.
It's almost 10 p.m., so we got to wind this thing down. It's just getting started for the boys over at Dixie. Fun fact, you did know that Utah Tech was formerly known as Dixie State, right?
Yeah, and they went 2-10 last year.
Dixie State versus Abilene Christian, September 28th. Primetime television homecoming for Dixie.
It's crazy, man. Crazy.
All right, folks. It's been fun. Sean, you're welcome back anytime. It's a pleasure having you on. And certainly as we get more recruiting stuff and we get closer to basketball, we'll chat again. We'll make this happen. This was fun. Folks, if you're here and you've been enjoying the content, go ahead and give Sean a follow. If you're not following me yet on Twitter, I'm at From the Hawkeye on Twitter. Also, hit up social media, Facebook, Instagram. I need those platforms to grow. I need to do a better job. Please help the cause there. Give them a follow, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, on all the major social media platforms. Hit the like button on your way out. That helps as well. Sean, have a great night, and may the peace be with you in the countdown to August 31st.
And with your spirit.
Sean Bock, I'm Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm, folks. Have a great night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.